Welcome to Why I Quit, a show that covers real people quitting their 9-to-5 jobs in search of something different. Listen to inspiring conversations where we dive deep into the stories of why people quit their jobs, what were the hardest parts, where are they now, and any advice for people following the same path. I am so excited to introduce Lisa Keitges as this week's guest on Why I Quit. Listen as she discusses how starting her own business allowed her to work with nonprofit organizations that align with her values. Learn how she decided to go fully remote by moving from an apartment in New York City to a farmhouse in the Catskill Mountains during COVID. Get inspired hearing how quitting her job allowed her to change her relationship between work and life. Hey Lisa, thanks so much for joining me today.
Of course, Dave. Thanks for having me.
So can you start off and tell me a little bit about your education and what that led to for your first job?
Sure. So I grew up in Texas and I wanted to get far away to kind of see what the rest of the country looked like. So I went to school in Ohio. I wanted to go into government, and I thought about why I wanted to do that. And it was really to work for the common good. And although I didn't end up in government and never worked in it professionally, I think that has really kind of carried through as I've worked in nonprofits my entire career, and I've really loved it. But at the end of the day, I can still see that person that was there in school and understanding, what is my place in this world and how can I be beneficial to others?
Tell me a little bit about, from graduation, what was the initial job search like and what did that turn into for you?
So I graduated in 2009. So it was right at the beginning of, I guess, the midpoint of the recession, the Great Recession. Nobody was getting jobs. And frankly, it was a very scary time, but in hindsight, I should have been more scared. I think we were all just trying to figure it out. The people that I did know that I graduated with, they were getting deferred sometimes by many years that, yes, we want to hire you, but you can't start for another 2 years. People were traveling, they were going to graduate school, and they were just trying to understand their place in this world at that moment. So I, like many of my classmates, graduated without a formal job offer. I moved to New Orleans, and I was very fortunate to kind of look through my entire LinkedIn network, look at every alumni from my school, and as I was doing cold outreach to people that had been alumni from my school, one person got back to me. It was the strength coach for the New Orleans Saints. And he said, why don't you just come intern with us for the summer while you're figuring things out? So that's what I did. It was a very twisty path, but thankfully it worked out.
What was your expectation of what a corporate full-time role was going to be and what that turned into for you?
The first summer that I worked for the Saints, it's funny in hindsight because it happened to be the year that they won the Super Bowl. So I was with them that entire year. I feel really guilty saying because I wasn't a huge football fan at the moment. And maybe that was a good thing at the end of the day. And my job was essentially one person of a 10-person team of interns that was essentially meant to control the parking flow, to make sure everything was cleaned up afterwards, to just do all the stuff when you need someone to do it. You just sort of throw it at someone. And, at the time I wasn't I have a college degree. What do you mean I'm picking up smoothies off the ground? But it ended up being a really great lesson for me in kind of hard work and perseverance, and standing out in the 115-degree Louisiana heat for an entire summer was very humbling, and I think needed at that moment in time. But the good thing that happened to me is that I just did the best that I could at that job that I had. I stayed late one night to help the staff put together some sort of gift bag, and the next day they had talked to the main woman in HR and said, hey, Lisa's a really hard worker. We need some extra hands around the office. So they hired me in full time to work in the front office. I kind of had the role where they created it for me because they needed somebody in that role that was dependable. And I kind of did everything. I assisted the co-owners. I assisted the community relations team. I assisted kind of any sort of administrative support. I answered phones, all that sort of stuff for an entire year. In some ways, I feel like I've trained my whole life to work in an office. I know that sounds really strange, but growing up, my dad would bring me to his office to stuff envelopes on Saturdays, and I loved it. So that sort of culture really worked for me. The 9 to 5 really worked for me, and I loved it. And after a year, and after they won the Super Bowl and the economy was doing a little bit better, I decided to make a transition into the nonprofit world at that time.
Was it hard leaving? Were you nervous about it, or were you excited to, kind of dive into this new path?
I have just a lifelong fear of disappointing people, I think. So leaving jobs is really difficult. And no matter how many jobs I've left over my lifetime now, it's still hard every single time. What I saw at the Saints is that because it was such a great place to work and a very in-demand place to work, people just didn't leave their jobs. I mean, people stayed there for a long time, sometimes decades. And I knew that I would never kind of rise through the ranks there. One thing that I did at the Saints that I loved is I would go out with their community affairs / youth education teams, and we would go out to these rural schools in wherever Louisiana, and we would teach these kids how to throw footballs and run drills and talk about how you can grow up to be like a good person and you can achieve things. And because the Saints are such a symbolic team in New Orleans for sort of renewal. And I loved that feeling of being face to face with people that, with just a little bit of encouragement could learn to excel. It wasn't necessarily that I was looking for a nonprofit job, but I did know that I wanted to help people. So as I was sort of looking at the different opportunities out there, I found one at the local SPCA, which was the animal shelter, and they needed an event coordinator, which was, a very low paying but high responsibility job, but it was a raise for me. So I was really happy to take it. And then the Saints helped me, people that I worked with kind of helped refer me over there also. And through the job at the SPCA, I did everything in terms of the event. So I did the logistics and I helped kind of coordinate some of the fundraising, and I fostered dogs and I walked dogs. And when big transports happened, I chipped in where I could, and I did that. And I did community building and I did relationship building with restaurants and individuals. And what I learned about that job is the importance of, one, finding your own unique skill set, what makes you special, what it is that makes people want to help you and support you moving forward. And then just kind of trying everything, even though you feel really uncomfortable and you're 23 and you say, I don't know how I ended up here, and just sort of running at it. And I was with the SPCA for about a year and a half or so.
At this time, are you kind of figuring out what you like and, kind of where you see your career going? Or are you more in the path of, I'm just going to keep doing whatever's thrown at me and figure it out as it goes along?
Both. I think I was figuring out what I was good at, and I was also figuring out what I wanted to do with my career. I knew that I liked being face-to-face and building relationships. One thing that I love about the nonprofit sector is I like to think that you interact with people at their very best, right? Especially when it comes to philanthropy and fundraising. Sometimes they've reached a level of success where they can give back, whether that be $10 or $10,000. It really allowed me to see the good in people and to see it kind of consistently, right? And it's really saying, okay, I have money. What do I want to put my money behind that is going to make this world a better place? So I knew in terms of a long-term career trajectory, I wanted something like that. But I was also just trying to figure it out because, when you graduate, or at least the way that I was, is I didn't know all the different opportunities that there was out there. And New Orleans is really a microcosm. There's only so many kind of jobs and industries that exist there. And, eventually when I left New Orleans and I moved to Washington, D.C., and I experienced so much more, I think at the time my scope was still really limited. The change to D.C. and then eventually to New York was life-changing for me in terms of what I saw existed and the sorts of industries that existed and the sorts of skill sets that people were looking for.
And talk to me a little bit about your experience in terms of moving to DC. What did that look like in terms of, your new role and your, kind of your work responsibilities there?
I think after living in New Orleans for 2 years, some people say to me, why'd you ever leave? That place is great. And I think that it has a very specific culture And I needed to get to a place at that moment that took work a little more seriously. That was just at the place that I was in my life, although I would love to be there now. I quit my job in New Orleans. I didn't have a job in DC yet. I was very fortunate that my sister lived in DC, and she, at 2 separate times in my adult life, has allowed me to live in her basement. So I kind of moved up. I slumped it in her basement for a while before I eventually got a job that I loved. But what I learned from working in DC is how different people are regionally, kind of how people thought in New Orleans versus how they thought in DC and then eventually in New York, and how they thought about work, right? Like, how do I interact with people? And then in what area of their life do they kind of put work? Is work their entire life, which DC tends to find people that more self-identify with what they do, versus New Orleans, that you could be anyone. But people don't know you about your job. They know you about the kind of person you are and how you interact with the world. So I think having the New Orleans perspective in DC was really helpful. But as someone who's a natural workaholic, and as I said, I hate disappointing people, I just worked a lot and I identified with work. I went to networking events. I did all those things you do when you're in your mid-20s at that time. If you're going to do it, I think the mid-20s was the time to do it, right? And I made a lot of good friends through work. I think eventually on in my career, that sort of workaholic tendency caught up with me.
You mentioned that you are a little bit of a workaholic. What was your work-life balance like? And then how did that shift your mindset as you progressed into different areas of your career as well?
So I think in the job that I had in DC, it wasn't necessarily that they asked me to work all the time. I think that I worked fairly normal hours when I was in DC, let's say 9 to 5, 9 to 6. But I think when you're in your 20s and you're also in DC, there is a force around the city that encourages you to do more, to do better. People were always talking about side hustles, or they were talking about studying for grad school or law school or med school or whatever that may be. And that it was like you had your job and then you had your side hustle and then you had your plans, right, for the future. And I think that helps to encourage a community of people that are constantly thinking about the future and not necessarily right now, right? It's like, what will I be in 2 years, in 5 years, in 10 years? Because of that, I think it never really stopped, right? You like leave your job at 5 or 6 and then you go to a networking event, or then you study for the GRE, or you do whatever. Never thinking that where you are at that moment is good enough. And that when it kind of breeds that culture, I feel like there's a lot of people that are just like me now in their 30s that are saying, kind of spent my best years worried about work and about my future. And not that this conversation is necessarily going to change that, but I hope it gives some additional perspective.
Now you have your own consulting business, but at the time, were you entrepreneurial growing up? Did you ever think that you would start your own business, or was that a complete surprise to you?
I didn't necessarily think I had the guts to do it. I mean, I think it took me getting pushed to a certain point to do it. And it's something that I was always interested in doing, but didn't necessarily think I would have the expertise to do or have like a great idea to do. And that I had always had this angst in me. And now I've learned that it's a common millennial angst. But I always had this angst of understanding, like, I have my life and then I have my work, and how can I have both and be happy in both? And I've realized that business ownership is a way to do that. And many people of my generation, of our generation, have gone on to do that. But I always thought that I would just sort of like work up the ranks. Maybe eventually I would be the head of a development department, or I'd be the head of an organization. But I got to the point in my career where I started looking at the people that were above me, and that were 2 above me, and that were 3 above me, and realized that I didn't necessarily want that life, and that I wanted a different life. But I had to come to that conclusion, you know, on my own, which I eventually did.
So talk to me a little bit about how that conclusion came about, and then, you know, what was kind of like the time frame and the process of making the leap to go out on your own.
So you make it sound like it's so planned, and for me it really wasn't planned at all. And at any second of a day I could have given you a different answer. I moved from DC to New York. I was working at NYU in a very kind of high-end fundraising capacity, and I realized that while it was a great, great learning experience, I didn't really know where I would go from there in the fundraising world, because that's kind of, one of the higher end opportunities. And so I went into consulting for a national firm, and it was just a tremendous learning opportunity for me. And I just soaked it all in. And to go back to the themes of my life, I like to work. I don't like to disappoint people. I like to be active. I like to learn new things. I found consulting very rewarding for about 3.5 years. I just kept taking on more and more work. And when you're at an organization and you excel at something, people give you more and they give you more responsibility. And I think I just didn't know how to push back. I didn't want to say no, so I put so much of that on myself. I got put on a project where I was traveling all the time and I felt like I couldn't be successful. And I just reached the point of what I now recognize as burnout, which I didn't know at that moment, but in hindsight, I can see it so clearly. And I remember I had a conversation with a friend, and she said, if it comes to the point where your job is affecting your professional life, it's affecting your personal life, it's affecting your relationships, it's affecting your health, this is not healthy for you. And you need to remove yourself from that situation. And of course, she gave me that guidance, and I want to say I quit right away, but it probably took a while, at least a couple of months for me to fully absorb that. And I reached a point in a project that was a little bit of a break for me. I felt like I had to make a decision. So I decided to put in my notice to my consulting firm, no thinking at that time to start my own business, but as it happened, and as I kind of went into an interim period where I thought, what do I do now? Where do I go? How do I want to pivot? Do I want to get out of the industry completely? People that I know and people in my just greater network started reaching out to me and asking me to do kind of little things here and little things there, and then bigger things and then bigger things. And as part of that, I incorporated, because that's the smart thing to do in terms of tax and liability reasons. And it just sort of boomed after that. And I felt so, so grateful. And then I realized that I could have consulting, which I loved doing, and I could have kind of freedom and ability to control my life and my narrative. And now I've been doing this for 3 years now. I don't know, I've lost track of time, and I have no plans of stopping. It's really been very enjoyable.
And so when you, officially made that leap and you had no idea what you were gonna do next, were you terrified in terms of figuring out what to do next, paying the bills, all of these things? Where was your mindset at that point?
I think if you're not scared, you didn't take a big enough chance. So I was terrified. I had, no income coming in. I was living in New York, which is a very expensive lifestyle to live. I realized that it was more important for me to have a better balance in my life than it was for me to live the current life that I was living. So I thought about it. I thought about what am I willing to give up? Am I willing to leave New York City? Am I willing to leave my apartment? Am I willing to move back into my sister's basement? Which I feel really grateful that that's always been something that's been open to me in my career. And when the answer to all of that was yes, the answer became easier. When I said, okay, I can afford to live, for X amount of months. One thing that I did was really helpful is, when you go up in your salary, then your living expenses start to blow up and you start to spend in relation to how much you're making. So I sat down and I kind of created a zero budget of figuring out how much do I actually need in order for my current life. And then how much do I need for a much lessened version of my current life? And I realized that it was less than I thought. And then I said, as long as I can make this level, then I can make my life work for now. And again, when I went out on my own, it wasn't about this is going to be my life forever. It was what's my life for the next 3 months, for the next 6 months going to look like. And I feel thankful that I hadn't had to get to the point where I said, oh my God, I have to take any job available to me. I was really thankful that that never came.
Something I'm curious about is, in your new business, you're doing relatively similar work that you were doing at the consulting firm. So talk to me a little bit about how you were able to structure that business, or think about the projects or the work that you wanted to do, to be able to like fit that into a lifestyle that had more work-life balance at the same time. So what were some steps or things that you took in that department?
Well, I find that when you do work that you love with clients that you love, it doesn't feel as stressful. So I think that's kind of the first piece here. I decided that when I started taking on my own clients that I would only work with organizations that aligned with my interests, how I thought I could be helpful, and what I thought the world needed, right? And if I'm going to be honest, that's not every organization. That's not even 25% of organizations. And I have found that my great network has referred me to organizations that fit that narrative. In terms of how I structure my work, I really, working at a national firm was extremely helpful in giving me a framework about how to think about successful organizations. And then the thing that I added into that was what makes me special and unique, right? What is it that I specialize in? One, what is it that my life experience can help kind of contribute to? And then how do I marry that life experience and that expertise and also that time that I have to contribute to something with organizations that I love? And like, where does that perfect fit lie? In terms of work-life balance now, as a business owner, you can choose what to take on. You can choose what to do. You can choose what to say no to. When you're a business owner, the worst thing that can happen is someone can say, I don't want to work with you and you don't fit with what it is that I need, or I don't want to work with you as a person. And at the end of the day, that's actually better because they have to come into this relationship knowing where your boundaries lie, and I have to come in being very clear about them, and then we come to a good working relationship that way. I think that my clients have really come to appreciate that I say, this is what I will do, and this is what I will not do, and this is what I can give you, and this is what you can expect, right? And that when I meet all those things, everyone's happy, or when I exceed those things. But when they come to me later and say, can you do this? And I say, no, then that's where a relationship goes sour. And I think I learned that too from working with a national firm, is that you really have to draw your boundaries. Otherwise, they just expect kind of the world from you. Also, as a sole proprietor, I'm able to charge less, I think, than people that have a lot of overhead costs. And that also allows, I think, my clients to feel a little at ease in terms of what they can ask me to do and also how I interact with them, right? Because I don't come with a big team. It's just me kind of bringing my own expertise. But I think the beauty of an entrepreneur and owning a business is you sort of feel your way around and you say, okay, this works, this doesn't work. I did this on a project and, it didn't really work, or it did. And I want to build that into everything that I do now. And just being able to make those business decisions and constantly kind of ebbing and flowing with work and changing how I do things has been really rewarding. And I suspect I'll continue to do that and to change how I do things for the next 10, 15, 20 years, however long it is that I'm doing this.
It seems like you have a strong sense of community wherever you go, and you kind of dive into whether it's networking events, connecting with alumni, mentors, things like that. How important is that to you, and was that to you as you, kind of grew up through your career and got you to where you are today?
I am only where I am because people believed in me. And I really, really mean that. I didn't do this by myself, would never say that I did this by myself. Definitely don't feel that way. Networking is such a buzzword. I really see it as building a community of champions that want to help you and or you want to help, right? And how do we build a community of like-minded people that just believe that we want to kind of live this world up together? The way, I come from a family that didn't necessarily have a lot of connections, right? I mean, I can't think of any connections that came out of my parents in terms of what I do now. But of course, they instilled me with great values. They just were in different industries. So as I was coming up, I kind of saw every opportunity as an opportunity to understand people that work in what it is that I do. So every boss that I had, every kind of person that was just more senior to me that was in any organization, and to really hear what they had to say and then to loop back to them and say, okay, this is what I did, this is what you said. And I found that after many years of doing that, that has really been helpful to me. You know, I will still reach out to people from like my first job and be like, what do you think about this? You know, and now we're a little more peers, which is a funny kind of transition to have. Especially when I started my own business, I have to say that the people that I thought would be most helpful to me when I started my own business actually weren't necessarily. It was people that were kind of part of my broader community that said, oh, Lisa's doing this now, like we need her or we want to help her, whatever that may be. They ended up being extremely helpful to me. And then through consulting, my relationships and my network have only grown. I've gotten to know so many more people in the last 3 years than I've known in the last 15 years. I feel very strongly now that I'm older about you never kind of leave a bridge burned, that if, you know, something didn't go right, communication solves almost everything. I think that people know that I'm in it for the right reasons, and they know that I am a person of my word and that I want to make sure they're happy at the end of the day. So we just tend to leave things, I think, on a good note now, because this is a small world, right? Things loop back to you, but also because to get back, I never want to disappoint people. I want to make sure everyone feels okay. I wasn't always this big of a community builder and community champion. I think that kind of growing up as an Asian American that grew up in North Texas, and I was actually born in Japan, I always felt a little bit like an outsider. And I realized at some point in my life that the only person that saw me as an outsider was me. And that I had to just sort of insert myself into situations and pretend like I'm meant to be there. And I think that that has really helped me.
And I want to transition a little bit. And during COVID, you made a big move in transition in terms of location. Talk to me a little bit about that and how that's changed your lifestyle and everything else in general.
So my boyfriend and I were locked down in our Manhattan apartment for 2 months or whatever. We were kind of right in South Midtown. And I think I've probably heard enough ambulances for a lifetime. Our lease was coming up. We decided to buy a house in the Catskill Mountains, which is kind of a couple hours outside of New York City. It's a big second home destination. But we decided to go ahead and just make a big move. Right? We came up here, we live here full time, we live in a farmhouse, we're on a whole bunch of acres, and we deal now with deer and wild turkeys and guns off in the distance, that sort of thing. That was never something we dealt with in New York City. And I think that making a move like this has naturally caused me to reevaluate how it is that I think about work and how it is that I think about home. When I was in Manhattan, I was going to clients' offices multiple times a week. I was constantly seeing people in person. I was constantly doing networking in person and catching up with old friends in person. And when COVID happened, it was just like a dead cut in it, right? And, you know, New York City got shut down. We couldn't even leave our apartments for a period of time. My only companion was my dog on like our 5-mile walks. I think I needed that moment that said like, okay, you are just gonna stop. Right? You're going to stop meetings. You're going to stop seeing clients. You're just going to do it online. That made me sit back and reevaluate how I work. And I'm fortunate that my boyfriend also owns his own business. So we're both sole proprietors. We both work full-time from home now, or at least that's been our decision. We didn't work full-time from home before. And that we said, if we're going to do it, now's the best time to do it. Right? We have good, thriving businesses. We can relocate. We may lose some clients, but at the end of the day, what's more important to us, right? And we're going to try it. We've been up here for a couple of months now. I can't work 24/7 because I have to chop firewood and I have to like service our pickup truck and I have to shovel snow, things that I never had to do before. But you know what? I love it. It's so fun and I love it. And I think that my future, that the clients that I work with in the future, now in this new world, will understand that that's just part of my life, right? That I will always be responsive to them, but I also have so many other obligations that I'm kind of working with now and that I'm seeing through. But at the end of the day, again, it goes back to communication, right? This is what you can expect from me. And this is when you can expect it from me, and this is how we will be successful together.
In terms of, your consulting business, this new property, obviously you've had like a lot of changes in a short period of time. I'm curious, how does that translate to, your goals over the next 3 to 5 years of where you want to take it in terms of, work or life personally in general as well?
You would think I'd have a better answer for this question, like this far into my career. But what I've realized is I just need to continue to be guided by the things that are important to me. And then I have to believe at the end of the day that things are going to work out. So I'm going to continue to work with organizations that I care about. And that is changing on a month by month basis based on kind of what's happening in the world and different information that I take in. Every now and then I'll talk to a client that I didn't know was something that I cared about, and then they convince me that it is something that I care about. And I love that because it brings in a whole new interest for me. So I think being guided by that, being guided by hobbies. I think for the first time in my life, I've never really had hobbies, but now being, doing gardening and doing all these things that I can do now that I have the opportunity. And then being guided by kind of my place in this larger world, right? So again, what is my skill set? And my skill set is going to constantly change based on the projects that I work on and the people that I work with. So what is my skill set? What is my big value add? How can I provide the most amount of work and worth for a client? And how do I help them further what it is that they do? I've also seen that the more organizations that I work with, the more I see through lines across so many organizations and how they can make an impact. I love to pair organizations together that are doing complementary work so they can do more things. My whole goal is just to make a really positive mark, because I feel like so many people are, whether they mean to or not, making negative marks on the world. So I want to try to counteract as much as possible while still holding that balance. And with having a small business, if I realize that I cannot keep up with my life and my work, I can just take on less clients, right? And be really selective about who it is that I work with. Because the last thing I want to do is take on too much and not be able to help myself or anyone else for that matter.
Thinking about all the people out there that have either recently quit their jobs or looking to quit their jobs, what's a piece of advice that you wish you knew through the process, or something that was most helpful that helped you get to where you are today?
What I've learned is that nobody is going to be as big of a champion of you as you. So you have to believe in your ability to be successful, to succeed. Because at the end of the day, people are self-interested. I mean, they may love you, but especially organizations, right? They want to do what's kind of best for the organization. And even though individual people may be supportive, the organization as a whole, if you're a good worker, of course, doesn't want you to leave. And I think you have to say, what do I want my life to look like in 5 years? Or what do I want it to feel like? And am I on the path to have it feel that way? And then once you kind of make that decision, involve your community, right? Reach out to people you haven't talked to for a while. Everyone has good advice to give. Ask them, regardless of their level, what they think. Then kind of make moves based on your own intuition and what you think feels right and true to who you are. We as workers are in a great position to kind of leave, do new things, to explore new avenues, and to also write what we want the future to look like for workers, right? Do we want it to look hybrid? Do we want it to look like 9 to 5 and laws that say you can't email me after 5, whatever it may be? Now is the time to do that. Workers haven't always been to this sort of advantage. So even if you're not looking to quit your job and start a new business, I think that you need to think about the power that you do have right now to make things better for people in the future. And for those of us that are in a position of power, to also be able to advocate for the people that are under us, right? When you're first starting in your career, or you may be a certain level, you may not have as much leverage as someone who's a manager or someone that's a little higher up. So just think about how you can help others and get their feedback, and then kind of work from there. And again, I think that communication is just a huge piece of this, and that companies want to keep us and they want to keep us happy. So we need to tell them how that can be and not shy away or skirt around the issue.
Well, thank you so much for your time. It was amazing hearing your story, and I'm excited to see where you take it next.
Of course. Thank you, Dave. And same. Ditto.
Thank you for listening. It really means a lot to us. We want to hear from you as we keep growing. Please reach out on whyiquit.co if you have any feedback or potential guests. A special thanks to Chris Dole for the music. Please check out his newest album, Here's to You, on Spotify. Thank you, and we will be back next week with another episode.